Why did the greatest empire in history fall? The Roman Empire didn't collapse because of wars alone. In this video, we uncover the hidden economic crisis behind its downfall: currency devaluation, inflation, heavy taxation, and a system that slowly destroyed itself from within. What really killed Rome was not outside enemies, but its own economy. Roman economic collapse. Analysis under 12 headings. 1. The real reason for the collapse. The collapse of the Roman Empire cannot be explained only by wars and invasions. In fact, one of the most critical factors that weakened this great power from its foundation was economic, in other words, financial collapse. For centuries, Rome was the most powerful state in the Mediterranean world. However, over time, it began to collapse under the weight of its own economic system. The breaking point, often overlooked, was this: economic and financial collapse. For centuries, Rome was the strongest empire in the Mediterranean world, but over time, it began to be crushed under its own economic structure. 2. An economy based on conquest. Rome's economy was largely based on conquest. As new lands were captured, gold, silver, slaves, and tax revenues increased. But when expansion stopped, this income source also disappeared. Especially after the Pax Romana period, when borders became stable, Rome could no longer grow richer as before. Despite this, expenses did not decrease. In fact, they constantly increased. Gold, silver, slaves, tax revenues would increase, and the state would become richer. But there was only one condition for this system: continuous expansion. 3. The stopping of expansion. After the Pax Romana period, Rome no longer expanded as before. There were no new lands, but expenses did not decrease. Instead, they increased. The army was large, borders were vast, state expenses were heavy. Income was decreasing while expenses were increasing. 4. The growing burden of the army. The largest expense was the military. To protect its vast borders, Rome had to feed, equip, and pay hundreds of thousands of soldiers. This placed a huge burden on the state treasury. As the number of soldiers increased, costs also grew exponentially. This constantly strained the state budget. 5. The breakdown of the monetary system. To cover the deficit, the state chose a dangerous path: changing the monetary system. Especially from the time of Nero, silver content in coins was reduced. More money was minted. In other words, money continued to be produced, but its value gradually decreased. Over time, this led to a serious inflation crisis. 6. Inflation and loss of trust. There was more money, but it was worth less. The key point here is the same amount of money could buy less. Prices increased rapidly. People's purchasing power decreased. This turned into a severe inflation crisis. And most importantly, economic trust was shaken. 7. Tax pressure and social collapse. To cover its deficits, the state increased taxes. This especially affected the tax system became increasingly heavy. The state collected more taxes from the population to cover rising expenses. This put farmers and small producers in a very difficult situation. Many people were forced to abandon their land or became dependent on large landowners. This reduced production and further weakened the economy. Many people were forced to abandon their land or became dependent on large landowners. This reduced production and further weakened the economy. Trade also suffered during this period. The decline of safe roads, piracy, and internal conflicts made trade difficult. Cities began to lose their economic vitality. The slowdown of trade in a large economy like Rome created a chain reaction that shook the entire system. Rome's trade network gradually collapsed. 9. The collapse of the slave economy. The Roman economy had long relied on slave labor. Another major issue was labor. The Roman economy was heavily dependent on slavery. However, as conquests decreased, the supply of new slaves also declined. This reduced production and increased costs. The economy struggled to adapt to this change. The economy could not adapt to the new system. 10. Internal system breakdown. The Roman economic collapse was not caused by a single reason. There were multiple interconnected problems: inflation, heavy taxation, decline in trade, labor crisis, collapse of the slave system. 11. The real breaking point. Rome did not fall due to external debt. In modern terms, there was no external debt. There was no financial credit system. But Rome's real problem was not external debt, it was its internal system. 12. Conclusion. The lesson of history. Rome devalued its own currency, lost public trust, and collapsed economically. And history showed us something very clear. An empire does not collapse from the outside, it collapses from within. Real power is not printing money, raising taxes, or avoiding debt. Real power is trust, and the moment Rome lost that trust, it began to disappear from history.